Captain Jessica Martinez had been flying military aircraft for 12 years, but nothing had prepared her for the radio silence that greeted her as she approached the restricted airspace. Her F-16 Fighting Falcon hummed beneath her as she maintained formation with her wingman, Lieutenant David Chen. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Escort a high-priority transport through hostile territory. What they hadn't mentioned was that the area of operations would be crawling with F-22 Raptors that seemed to have other plans. Ghost 17, this is Viper 21 requesting clearance to enter AO. Jessica transmitted on the secure channel, her voice steady despite the growing tension in her chest. The response came not from air traffic control, but from an unfamiliar call sign that sent chills down her spine. Viper 21, this is Phantom Lead. You are not cleared to enter this airspace. Maintain current heading and altitude until further notice. The voice was cold, professional, and utterly dismissive. Jessica's jaw tightened as she watched two F-22s emerge from the clouds ahead, their stealth profiles cutting through the sky like silver daggers. Phantom Lead, we have priority clearance for this mission. Check your boards, she replied, her fingers dancing across the communications panel to verify her authorization codes. Everything checked out on her end. The mission was legitimate, sanctioned by the highest levels of command. Yet here she was, being blocked by aircraft that shouldn't even be in this sector. Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled through the intercom. Captain, I'm showing 4 more Raptors on scope. They're boxing us in. Jessica's radar confirmed what her wingman had spotted. 6 F-22s had materialized around them, forming a loose perimeter that effectively trapped them outside the operational area. Viper 2-1, you will turn around and return to base immediately. This is not a request. The Phantom Lead's tone had grown more menacing, and Jessica could see the lead F-22 adjusting its position to block their forward progress more aggressively. Negative, Phantom Lead. I have my orders, and I intend to follow them. Jessica's voice carried the weight of her conviction, but inside, her mind was racing. This wasn't standard protocol. Something was very wrong with this situation, and she had a sinking feeling it had everything to do with the classified cargo they were supposed to be escorting. The transport aircraft they were meant to protect was already 15 minutes behind schedule, circling at a lower altitude while waiting for the all-clear signal. Jessica knew that every minute of delay put lives at risk and potentially compromised whatever operation was unfolding below. But the F-22s weren't budging, and their silence over the radio was becoming increasingly ominous. Captain Martinez, came a new voice over the radio, this one different from the others. Quieter, more personal. I think you should know. We've been briefed about the name on your tail fin. The one that's been painted over but still shows through the primer. Jessica's blood ran cold. Her aircraft had been reassigned to her unit just 6 months ago, and the maintenance crew had indeed painted over some previous markings. She'd never bothered to ask what had been there before. Now, as she glanced back at her tail section in the mirror, she could make out the faint outline of letters beneath the fresh paint. Captain Jessica Martinez felt her heart hammering against her ribs as the mysterious pilot's words echoed in her headset. The name on her tail fin. What name? She'd inherited this F-16 from another pilot, but the paperwork had been frustratingly vague about its previous assignments. The maintenance logs showed routine paint jobs and standard refurbishments, nothing that would explain why 6 of the military's most advanced fighters were currently treating her like a threat. Phantom Lead, I need clarification on your last transmission, Jessica said, trying to keep her voice level while her mind raced through possibilities. What name are you referring to? The response came not from the lead aircraft but from the pilot who had spoken before, the one whose voice carried an odd mixture of respect and wariness. The name is Redline Rachel. Ring any bells, Captain? The call sign hit Jessica like a physical blow. Redline Rachel. She'd heard whispers about that pilot in the ready rooms and officer clubs, stories told in hushed tones about a pilot who'd pushed every envelope, broken every rule, and ultimately paid the price for her recklessness. Rachel Henderson had been a legend in the fighter community until she'd crossed a line that ended her career and nearly started an international incident. That aircraft was Rachel Henderson's, Jessica said slowly, the pieces beginning to fall into place. But she was grounded 3 years ago, court-martialed for entering restricted airspace during a classified operation, the Phantom pilot interrupted. For interfering with a black ops mission that cost American lives, for disobeying direct orders from multiple commanding officers. His voice grew harder with each accusation. And now you're flying her bird into the same kind of situation. Jessica felt the injustice of the situation wash over her like a tide. She was being judged not for her own actions, but for the sins of a pilot she'd never even met. The F-16 beneath her was just an aircraft, metal and electronics and fuel. It had no memory of its previous pilot's mistakes, no inherent tendency toward insubordination. Yet these F-22 pilots were treating it like it was cursed. Listen carefully, all of you, Jessica transmitted on the open channel, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned her rank through merit, not politics. I am not Rachel Henderson. I didn't know this aircraft's history, and I don't care about its previous pilot's mistakes. I have a mission to complete, and I have people depending on me to get it done. The lead F-22 pilot's response was immediate and harsh. Captain Martinez, you need to understand something. That aircraft has been flagged in our systems since Henderson's court-martial. Any pilot flying it into sensitive airspace is automatically considered a potential security risk. Those are our standing orders." "Standing orders from who?" Jessica demanded, her anger finally breaking through her professional composure. "Show me the regulation that says I can be guilty by association with a piece of machinery. Show me the rule that says I can't do my job because someone else failed to do theirs." The radio fell silent for several long moments. Jessica could see the F-22s maintaining their positions, but she sensed uncertainty in their formation. They were pilots just like her, and they understood the fundamental unfairness of what was happening. But they also had their orders, and in the military, orders were sacred, even when they were wrong. Lieutenant Chen's voice broke the silence. "Captain, we're burning fuel, and that transport is getting restless. We need to make a decision." Jessica knew her wingman was right, but she also knew that backing down now would mean accepting a system that condemned her for crimes she hadn't committed. Captain Jessica Martinez made a decision that would either salvage her career or end it completely. She keyed her radio and spoke with the calm authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Phantom Lead, I'm going to tell you a story about Rachel Henderson that I bet you've never heard. And when I'm done, you're going to let me complete my mission, because you're going to understand that sometimes the system gets it wrong." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica could almost feel the tension radiating from the F-22s surrounding her, their pilots weighing their orders against their curiosity. Finally, the lead pilot's voice crackled back. "You've got 5 minutes, Captain. Make it count." Jessica took a deep breath and began. 3 years ago, Rachel Henderson was flying combat air patrol over the Mediterranean when she intercepted a distress signal from a civilian airliner. The plane had been hijacked by terrorists and was heading toward a NATO base in Italy. Henderson's commanding officer ordered her to maintain position and wait for backup, but she could see that the airliner wouldn't make it to the base. It was losing altitude fast. She paused, letting the weight of the story settle in. Henderson made a choice. She broke formation and intercepted the airliner, using her aircraft to force it away from populated areas. In doing so, she saved the lives of 300 passengers and crew, plus an unknown number of civilians on the ground. But she also violated direct orders and entered restricted airspace without authorization. The F-22 pilot's voice was quieter now, uncertain. "That's not the version we were told. We were briefed that she compromised a classified mission." "The classified mission was a weapons test," Jessica continued, her voice growing stronger. "A test of a new missile system that the brass considered more important than civilian lives. Henderson's actions forced them to abort the test and cost the defense contractors millions of dollars. So they buried her story, court-martialed her for insubordination, and made sure that any pilot who flew her aircraft would be treated as a potential troublemaker." Lieutenant Chen's voice came through the intercom, quiet but supportive. "Captain, how do you know all this?" Jessica smiled grimly. "Because Rachel Henderson is my sister, and she's been fighting for 3 years to clear her name and get her story told. The only reason I'm flying this aircraft is because I requested it specifically. I wanted to understand what really happened that day, and I wanted to honor her sacrifice by completing the missions she never got to finish." The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Jessica could see the lead F-22 adjusting its position slightly, and she sensed a shift in the dynamic of the confrontation. The pilot who had mentioned the name on her tail fin spoke up again. "Captain Martinez, if what you're saying is true, then we've been operating under false information." "It's true," Jessica replied firmly. "And right now, there's a transport full of medical supplies that needs to get through to coalition forces who are counting on us. Rachel Henderson saved lives by doing what was right instead of what was easy. I'm asking you to let me do the same." The radio crackled with cross-chatter between the F-22 pilots, their voices too low for Jessica to make out individual words. She could tell they were conferring, weighing her story against their orders, trying to decide whether to trust a pilot they'd been conditioned to distrust. "Phantom lead to Viper 2-1, came the eventual response. "We're going to escort you to the edge of the AO. After that, you're on your own." Jessica felt a surge of relief mixed with determination. "Copy that, Phantom lead. Thank you for listening." As the F-22s repositioned themselves into an escort formation, Jessica couldn't help but think about her sister Rachel, probably sitting in some desk job at a remote base, still fighting to clear her name. This mission wouldn't vindicate Rachel completely, but it was a start. And sometimes that's all you could ask for. The transport aircraft carrying critical medical supplies had been circling at low altitude for nearly 30 minutes, its pilot growing increasingly anxious as fuel levels dropped and the window for their delivery narrowed. Captain Jessica Martinez could hear the stress in the transport pilot's voice as he radioed for status updates, unaware of the high-stakes drama playing out above him. "Cargo 6, this is Viper 2-1. We're cleared for escort duty. Follow my lead and maintain radio silence once we enter the AO," Jessica transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The F-22s had repositioned themselves into a loose escort formation, but she could still feel the weight of their scrutiny. As they approached the area of operations, Jessica's radar began picking up hostile signatures, enemy aircraft patrolling the borders of the conflict zone. This was where the real danger lay, not in the politics and prejudices of her own side, but in the very real threat of enemy fighters that would shoot down the medical transport without hesitation. "Viper 2-1, this is Phantom lead. We're seeing multiple bogeys on scope. Recommend we take point and clear the path." The lead F-22 pilot's voice had shifted from hostility to professional cooperation, and Jessica felt a grudging respect for his willingness to adapt. "Negative, Phantom Lead. This is our mission. We'll take point." Jessica's response was firm but not confrontational. She needed to prove herself, not just to the F-22 pilots, but to herself. Flying in Rachel Henderson's aircraft meant carrying the weight of her sister's reputation, both the false accusations and the hidden heroism. The first enemy contact came without warning. A pair of hostile fighters emerged from a cloud bank, their radar signatures painting Jessica's aircraft immediately. "Viper 2-1, we have two bandits at 12 o'clock high. Cargo 6, maintain course and speed," she transmitted, her training taking over as she began evasive maneuvers. Lieutenant Chen moved into position to engage the second enemy aircraft while Jessica lined up on the first. The engagement was brief but intense, with both F-16s using their superior maneuverability to outfight the heavier enemy aircraft. Within minutes, both hostile fighters were neutralized, their wreckage scattered across the landscape below. "Good shooting, Viper 2-1, came the grudging praise from one of the F-22 pilots. "Henderson taught you well." Jessica felt a surge of pride at the compliment, but she also knew the mission was far from over. The transport still needed to reach its destination, and the enemy would undoubtedly send more aircraft to intercept them. As they pressed deeper into hostile territory, she found herself thinking about Rachel's story, about the impossible choices that military pilots sometimes had to make. The next wave of enemy aircraft came in larger numbers, and this time the F-22s didn't hesitate to engage. Jessica watched in awe as the stealth fighters tore through the hostile formation with devastating efficiency, their advanced weaponry making short work of the enemy aircraft. But she also noticed something else: the way they positioned themselves to protect the transport, putting their own aircraft at risk to ensure the medical supplies reached their destination. "Phantom Lead, why are you helping us?" Jessica asked during a brief lull in the action. "Your orders were to turn us back, not to escort us through hostile territory." The response came after a long pause. "Because you reminded us why we became pilots in the first place, Captain. It's not about following orders blindly. It's about doing what's right, even when it's difficult." The final approach to the drop zone was the most dangerous part of the mission. Enemy ground forces had positioned surface-to-air missiles along the flight path, and the transport would be vulnerable during its low-altitude delivery run. Jessica coordinated with the F-22s to suppress the ground threats while providing cover for the cargo aircraft. As the transport completed its mission and began its return journey, Jessica felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had delivered critical medical supplies to coalition forces, neutralized multiple enemy threats, and done it all while overcoming the prejudices and misconceptions that had nearly prevented the mission from succeeding. Viper 2-1, this is Phantom Lead. It's been an honor flying with you today, the F-22 pilot transmitted as they escorted the transport back to friendly airspace. And Captain, tell your sister that her reputation precedes her in all the right ways. Jessica smiled as she replied, "Roger that, Phantom Lead. I'll pass along the message." The debriefing session that followed would become the stuff of legend in military aviation circles. Captain Jessica Martinez stood before a room full of senior officers, some supportive, others skeptical, as she recounted the events of the mission. The F-22 pilots who had initially blocked her entry into the area of operations were also present, their testimony crucial to understanding what had really happened. "Captain Martinez," began Colonel William Hayes, the mission commander, "your actions today have raised some serious questions about our operational procedures. Can you explain why you chose to disobey the directive to return to base?" Jessica straightened in her chair, her voice clear and confident. "Sir, I was given a legitimate mission with proper authorization. The directive to return to base came from aircraft that had no authority to countermand my orders. I made a judgment call based on the information available to me and the lives that were at stake." The colonel's expression was unreadable as he consulted his notes. The F-22 pilots were operating under standing orders regarding aircraft with certain historical associations. Were you aware of your aircraft's previous assignment? "No, sir, I was not. And with respect, sir, I don't believe an aircraft's history should determine its current pilot's clearance level. I am not responsible for the actions of previous pilots, and I should not be held accountable for decisions I didn't make." One of the F-22 pilots, the one who had first mentioned the name on her tail fin, stood up. "Sir, if I may speak, Captain Martinez is absolutely correct. Our standing orders were based on incomplete information about the previous pilot's actions. We were told that pilot had compromised a classified mission, but we weren't told the full context of why those actions were taken." Colonel Hayes leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. "Elaborate, Lieutenant." "Sir, Captain Martinez informed us that the previous pilot, Rachel Henderson, had violated orders to save civilian lives. Our briefings portrayed her as a rogue pilot who had compromised national security, but the reality appears to be more complex. Captain Martinez's actions today demonstrated the same kind of moral courage that we should be encouraging, not punishing." The room fell silent as the implications of the pilot's words sank in. Jessica could see the wheels turning in the colonel's mind as he processed this new information. Finally, he spoke. Captain Martinez, are you related to Rachel Henderson? Yes, sir. She's my sister, and she's been fighting for 3 years to clear her name and get her story told truthfully. Colonel Hayes nodded slowly. I think it's time we had a conversation with Captain Henderson. In the meantime, I want a full review of the standing orders that prevented today's mission from proceeding smoothly. We cannot allow bureaucratic prejudices to interfere with legitimate military operations. As the debriefing session concluded, Jessica felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The mission had been successful, but more importantly, it had opened a door for Rachel's vindication. The F-22 pilots who had initially opposed her were now her strongest advocates, and their testimony would carry significant weight in any formal review. Lieutenant Chen approached her as they left the briefing room. "Captain, do you think this will really change anything for your sister?" Jessica looked up at the sky, where aircraft were taking off and landing in the endless cycle of military operations. "I think it's a start, David. Sometimes that's all you can ask for, a chance to tell your story and let the truth speak for itself." The weeks that followed the mission brought a series of investigations and reviews that would reshape how the military handled cases involving pilot misconduct. Captain Jessica Martinez found herself at the center of a bureaucratic storm, but she faced it with the same determination she had shown in the cockpit. Every meeting, every testimony, every official inquiry was another step toward clearing her sister's name and ensuring that other pilots wouldn't face the same unjust treatment. The first breakthrough came when Colonel Hayes's review team uncovered the classified files related to Rachel Henderson's court-martial. The documents revealed a pattern of cover-ups and misdirection that painted a very different picture of the events 3 years earlier. Rachel hadn't compromised a critical military operation. She had prevented a catastrophic terrorist attack while exposing the callous priorities of defense contractors who valued weapons testing over human lives. "Captain Martinez," Colonel Hayes said during one of their regular meetings, "I owe you an apology. Your sister's case was handled badly from the beginning, and the standing orders that nearly prevented your mission were based on deliberately falsified information." Jessica nodded, feeling a mixture of vindication and anger. "Sir, my sister has been carrying this burden for 3 years. She's been assigned to dead-end positions, passed over for promotion, and treated like a pariah by people who should have been celebrating her heroism." "That's going to change," the colonel replied firmly. "I'm recommending that Captain Henderson's court-martial be overturned and her record expunged. Furthermore, I'm proposing that she be awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for her actions in saving those civilian lives." The news of Rachel's impending vindication spread quickly through the military aviation community. Pilots who had whispered about "Redline Rachel" in hushed tones now spoke openly about her courage and sacrifice. The F-22 pilots who had initially blocked Jessica's mission became some of Rachel's strongest supporters, using their influence to ensure that the truth was widely disseminated. Jessica's own reputation was also transformed by the events. No longer was she just another pilot trying to prove herself. She was the sister who had fought for justice, the officer who had stood up to an unjust system, and the aviator who had completed a critical mission despite overwhelming obstacles. Her actions had not only saved lives, but had also exposed systemic problems that needed to be addressed. The formal ceremony to present Rachel Henderson with the Distinguished Flying Cross was held at Andrews Air Force Base, with hundreds of pilots and officers in attendance. Jessica stood proudly beside her sister as the citation was read, detailing Rachel's heroic actions and the injustices she had endured in the aftermath. Captain Rachel Henderson, the presenting officer, declared, "For extraordinary heroism in aerial flight, for saving the lives of 300 civilians, and for upholding the highest traditions of military service in the face of adversity, you are awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross." As Rachel stepped forward to receive the medal, Jessica felt tears streaming down her face. This moment had been 3 years in the making, but it represented more than just personal vindication. It represented a victory for truth over politics, for justice over convenience, and for the idea that doing the right thing was always worth the cost. After the ceremony, the two sisters walked together across the tarmac, their conversation quiet but meaningful. "Jess," Rachel said, "I can't thank you enough for what you did. Flying that mission, telling my story, fighting for the truth, it took real courage." Jessica smiled, her arm around her sister's shoulders. "You would have done the same for me. Besides, it wasn't just about clearing your name. It was about making sure that other pilots don't have to face the same injustices you faced." As they approached Jessica's F-16, Rachel ran her hand along the fuselage, tracing the outline where her name had once been painted. "You know, I always wondered what happened to this bird. I'm glad it found its way to someone who would treat it with respect." "It's just a machine, Rachel. The important thing is the pilot who flies it." Rachel nodded, but her expression was thoughtful. "Maybe. But machines carry history, and history has a way of shaping the future. Your mission in this aircraft didn't just clear my name. It showed everyone that sometimes the system gets it wrong, and when that happens, someone has to be brave enough to challenge it." The changes that resulted from Jessica's mission and Rachel's vindication extended far beyond their individual cases. New procedures were implemented to prevent the kind of bureaucratic prejudice that had nearly derailed the medical supply mission. Training programs were developed to educate officers about the dangers of making assumptions based on incomplete information. And perhaps most importantly, a culture of accountability was established that encouraged pilots to question unjust orders and stand up for their convictions. Lieutenant Chen, who had been Jessica's wingman during the controversial mission, was promoted to captain and assigned to a new program designed to review cases of alleged pilot misconduct. His first-hand experience with the Henderson case made him uniquely qualified to identify when the system was failing individual service members. "Captain Martinez," he said during their last conversation before his transfer, "that mission changed everything for me. I used to think that following orders was the most important thing a pilot could do. Now I understand that sometimes the most important thing is knowing when not to follow them." Jessica smiled at his words. "Just remember, David, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. Rachel taught me that, and I hope I've taught it to you." As the months passed, Jessica continued to fly missions and serve with distinction. But she also became an advocate for pilots who found themselves in situations similar to her sisters. She spoke at military academies, testified before congressional committees, and worked with advocacy groups to ensure that the lessons learned from Rachel's case would not be forgotten. The F-16 that had once carried Rachel Henderson's name and later brought Jessica Martinez into conflict with the F-22s was eventually retired from service. But before it was decommissioned, both sisters had a chance to fly it one more time, together in a two-seat trainer variant. As they soared through the clouds, Jessica couldn't help but think about the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You know, Rachel," she said over the intercom, "I think this old bird has one more story to tell." Rachel's laughter filled the cockpit. "What's that?" "The story of two sisters who refused to let the system break them, who fought for justice even when it seemed impossible, and who proved that sometimes the most important battles are the ones fought for principle rather than politics." As they executed a perfect formation flight over the base where Rachel had once been court-martialed, Jessica felt a sense of completion. The mission that had begun with F-22s blocking her path had ended with her sister's vindication and systemic changes that would benefit countless future pilots. It was a reminder that individual acts of courage could indeed change the world, one flight at a time. The legacy of what became known as the Henderson case continued to influence military aviation long after both sisters had retired from active duty. Flight schools taught courses on moral courage and the importance of questioning unjust orders. The Distinguished Flying Cross that Rachel had received was displayed in the Air Force Museum, along with a detailed account of her actions and the subsequent fight for justice. Years later, when young pilots faced their own moral dilemmas, they would remember the story of Rachel Henderson and Jessica Martinez, the sister who had been wrongly accused and the sister who had fought to clear her name. They would remember that sometimes the most important thing a pilot could do was not follow orders blindly, but to think critically about the consequences of their actions and the lives that hung in the balance. The F-22 pilots who had initially blocked Jessica's mission also became part of the story, their willingness to listen and change their minds serving as an example of intellectual honesty and professional growth. They spoke frequently about the importance of challenging assumptions and questioning the information they received, especially when it concerned the reputations and careers of their fellow pilots. The Henderson case taught us that we are all capable of making mistakes. One of them reflected years later. But it also taught us that we have the power to correct those mistakes when we're presented with new information. The courage to admit when we're wrong is just as important as the courage to stand up for what's right. In the end, the story of the F-22s that blocked Jessica Martinez from entering the area of operations became more than just a tale of military aviation. It became a parable about justice, courage, and the power of individual action to create lasting change. It reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the most important victories are won not in the skis, but in the quiet moments when someone chooses to do the right thing, regardless of the personal cost. Jessica Martinez, now a retired colonel, often spoke to young aviators about her experiences. Her message was always the same: fly with honor, fight for justice, and never forget that the aircraft you pilot carries not just your hopes and dreams, but the hopes and dreams of everyone who depends on you to do the right thing. The tail fin that had once carried Rachel Henderson's name and later brought Jessica Martinez into conflict with the most advanced fighters in the world was eventually restored and displayed in the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. Visitors could read the full story of both sisters, learning about courage, justice, and the price of doing what's right. And sometimes, on quiet days when the museum was nearly empty, retired pilots would stand before that display and remember their own moments of moral clarity, the times when they had to choose between following orders and following their conscience. The Henderson case had taught them that sometimes the hardest battles are fought not against enemy aircraft, but against the systems and prejudices that prevent good people from doing good work. The story of the F-22s that blocked Jessica Martinez from entering the area of operations had become legend, but its lessons remained painfully relevant. In a world where technology advanced rapidly, but human wisdom seemed to lag behind, the tale of two sisters who fought for justice served as a reminder that individual courage and determination could still make a difference. As Jessica often said in her speeches, we may not be able to change the world overnight, but we can change our small corner of it. And if enough people change their small corners, eventually, the whole world changes too. The name burned into the tail fin had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are the ones fought for the people who can't fight for themselves. And in the end, that was perhaps the most important lesson of all, that true heroism lies not in the spectacular acts that make headlines, but in the quiet determination to do the right thing, even when no one is watching. Rachel Henderson and Jessica Martinez had proven that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied, and that sometimes the arc of history does bend toward justice, but only when good people are willing to grab it and bend it themselves. Their story would continue to inspire pilots and non-pilots alike, reminding everyone that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most important flight plan is the one that leads toward truth and justice, regardless of the obstacles that stand in the way. The F-22s that had once blocked their path had become part of their story, a reminder that even the most advanced technology is only as good as the people who operate it, and that sometimes the most important battles are won not with weapons, but with words, courage, and an unwavering commitment to doing what's right.